Amy Klobuchar wrapping up what is, by any measure, a good night for her.
A good night for her and a good speech by her. Senator Klobuchar, right at the top of those remarks.
Because the best is yet to come.
The very top of her remarks saying, "Hello, America. I'm Amy Klobuchar, and I'll beat Donald Trump." Taking that moment, Robert Gibbs, we were just talking during the speech, saying a lot of times candidates in these moments take that first moment of their speech to thank all the people physically near them who they can see, who they know played a key role, and that must feel great in the room at the moment and for those people.
Right.
But when all of the networks turn their cameras to you because you are giving remarks on a night when you did great, you have a moment there where if you can capture the nation's imagination, you can really do something with it.
And she did an excellent job introducing herself to people that are probably tuning in and trying to figure out who she is. What has she done? How did she get here? What animates her? Why is she in this race? She really used that platform in a really important and big way. Again, it does drive me crazy when they say, oh, this is my neighbor's daughter who knocked on 12 doors. You know, you're speaking to that bigger audience. Use it. In 2008, I always tell the story that when we had to give a concession speech that we didn't believe would be a concession speech in New Hampshire with then candidate Barack Obama, we gave the same speech that we were going to give had we won. We just added a line that congratulated Hillary Clinton for winning New Hampshire, because we wanted to deliver a message about hope and change and the work that it would involve to get there. Same speech. And how do you take these moments that you're afforded with these bigger audiences and speak and project outside of that room and into somebody's living room and ultimately into somebody's life?
Claire, what is Amy's path?
Well, the biggest problem that Amy has at this point is how quickly these are going to come, and the fact that she has not been one of the premier online fundraisers. You know, I used to tease our friend, President Obama, during the campaign that he'd come to work every morning and open the door and open the cash register and it'd be full. He was really the first prolific online fundraiser. Fairness to Bernie, he's taken it to a whole new level. Bernie has raised money in small donations in an unprecedented way. So that's who she's competing against. So she will have to have a huge outpouring, because if she wants to compete on Super Tuesday, right now she's behind Tom Steyer in Nevada. She's registering at about 0% of the black vote everywhere. She's got a lot of work to do, and she needs an organization, and she needs money, and she needed it yesterday.
But you see her trying to build on it tonight, trying to make the most of what she's done in Iowa and New Hampshire to try to build that race. I mean, I think talking to her about the strategy for her campaign from the beginning, she was basically saying, listen, I got a tortoise approach to this. I'm not going to spend beyond my means. I'm going to build steadily. I will qualify for every single debate. I will hit every single benchmark. I will grow in a way that is quiet, and then you will see me perform. That was basically the way that she sketched out this campaign from the beginning. You have to believe, if this is going the way she intended, that she has some plan for scaling from here on out.
Joy, it couldn't be her intention to have basically no support among African-American voters.
It can't. And you know, she does have some major cities, you know, in her state where she could sort of resonate, you know, that show that she resonates with African-Americans. I was texting some friends in South Carolina to ask about her infrastructure there. She doesn't have it. So she's going to have to get enough money. There are other candidates like Steyer and obviously Bloomberg who are all over TV. She's behind on that. And so people don't know who she is. I agree with you, Rachel, that she used this moment, and with you, Robert, she used it really the best of any of the candidates. This is free media. And she used it to introduce herself, to make herself a very approachable, interesting character that I think people may look at for the first time and say maybe she's plausible. But she doesn't have the infrastructure to back it up. And
Can I just say to you, I think it's one of the best speeches by a female candidate.
Absolutely.
Because she was all things, right? She was a winner. She was a mother. She was the daughter of an alcoholic, and she let women candidates struggle. I worked for Sarah Palin, obviously Hillary Clinton got farther than she did, but you know, women candidates struggle with what parts of themselves to show, but she looked strong, she looked human. She spoke of her experience as a daughter of an alcoholic, her experience of a mother of a sick baby. I mean, I just thought as a political speech given by a woman candidate, it was up there with some of the best ones
And
I've
she
ever heard.
pairs that, and with, by the way, every single time I've ever run for office anywhere, I've won.
She was a winner. She was
I've
strong.
won that contest, and I've won every type of jurisdiction needed to compete in order to get that.
And she spoke to the point, which is she talked to Donald Trump. She talked about what Donald Trump has done, which a lot of the candidates spend a lot of time talking about themselves or talking about one another. She, about their experience. She talked about him and talked about how she could beat him.
I will say there was one moment in the speech tonight where she referenced the rule of law, talked about how America cannot afford it. It's too dangerous to have 4 more years of a president who believes he's above the rule of law. That is very poignant today when we are having what amounts to an emergency in terms of the rule of law with what's happening at the Justice Department. I will be interested to see, as we look ahead now to Senator Sanders and to Mayor Buttigieg, as we're expecting to hear from them tonight. They're both doing very well in New Hampshire, obviously, if they can actually include some of that in terms of, today was not a normal day. Today was a signal day in the Donald Trump presidency and in our nation's history in terms of the rule of law. And if nobody's going to talk about that in New Hampshire, it's understandable. I realize they got other things on their mind, but if one of the two of them or both of the two of them can pivot to not just having that be a standard line about Trump being bad, but this about referencing something that happened tonight, I think that's going to show a sort of political deftness and an awareness about how things are resonating in the country tonight.
It will be interesting to see, too, in the days that come, do candidates begin to use this as a way of getting the base refired up? And when I say refired up...
Use the crisis as a way?
Yeah, because I think politically, you look at it and say, okay, if you're wondering what bad things can happen, here's Exhibit A.
Yeah.
And, everybody came off of Iowa expecting the turnout to exceed what it had in 2008. I think we're still counting. It's barely exceeded in what it did in 2016, and everybody felt this deflation. We're watching the second most important number tonight is turnout. How will these candidates use it to get excited?
Yeah, the two most important numbers tonight are turnout and how many resignations there are going to be in protest of what just happened with the president intervening in these prosecutions today. Honestly, like, I can't, it's sort of a split screen, but it's all one story to me.
And a quote from the Warren speech, she called this a day when career prosecutors showed more backbone than almost every Republican senator.
Yep.
To the king of free media we go, Steve Kornacki, over at the board. Steve, I've been told that while we've been listening to Senator Klobuchar, the numbers have been migrating a little bit, cutting into someone's lead.
Yeah, we can show you now basically 2/3. You can see 64% of the state is in now, 2/3. Remember, I think when that speech started, we were talking about Sanders leading by about 6,000 votes statewide, excuse me. That number now, it's about 4,700, 4,751 right now is the margin for Sanders over Pete Buttigieg. It has come down. I can tell you what probably these two candidates are waiting for, what I think our decision desk is waiting for, a couple of outstanding areas still on this map. Number one, we've been talking all night about the border, the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border, the towns near there. Here's an example. Merrimack just came in a little while ago. We can show you in Merrimack. This is a big town just between Nashua and Manchester. Again, we've seen Buttigieg do very well in these parts of the state. He wins it. Now, what's that worth in terms of catching Sanders? He's trying to make up about 5,000 votes statewide. You see, he nets there about 250, just short of 250. Maybe wants a little bit more. He's going to have some more opportunities here in this part of the state. Derry's a biggie. Let's see what happens there. Let's see what happens in Windham. That's a biggie. We're waiting. This is only a small part of Salem, it turns out, that's come in. That's a big town. We're waiting on Salem. So some opportunities there. You see in this southeastern part of the state, just north of that Massachusetts border, look at all that navy blue that's coming in there. That's Buttigieg's color. So that's sort of fertile territory for him. That is countered with, you see a lot of these small towns around the state. You see that Sanders purple. So he's able to gain 18 votes here, 40 votes there. That's what Buttigieg is up against. And the two biggest things we are waiting on in the state right now, those two gigantic college towns. Hanover, that's where Dartmouth College is. By the way, you think college town, you think Bernie Sanders. Sanders only barely, by his standards, won Hanover in 2016 over Hillary Clinton. He did 15 points worse in Hanover than he did statewide. So let's see what happens in Hanover. And also the other side of the state, Durham, where the University of New Hampshire is, a bunch of votes there. Let's see what happens there. That was big Sanders country in 2016. But just statewide, again, that margin right now, it's about 4,700 votes. That's probably an uphill battle for Buttigieg, but there still are some places on the map, so let's see.
Steve, let me ask you a question. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but I will just throw it out there because we've been talking about it here at the table, which is turnout. Do we have any indication so far at the rate of turnout in New Hampshire, particularly compared with previous years?
Yeah, so here's what I can tell you. We've been tracking as each one of these counties comes in, you see at 100%. If it's, they're not all at 100% if they're colored in, but when they hit 100%, we've been tracking these in a spreadsheet and saying, what was the turnout in this county tonight? What was the turnout in it in 2016? What we can tell you is the counties that are in at 100% in New Hampshire right now, if you take their cumulative turnout for the night and you compare it to where those counties were in their total turnout in 2016, the turnout is up 18%, 18% right now. That's not a final number. That can be adjusted, but in the counties that have reported 100%, they are outpacing the 2016 level by 18% tonight.
That's right, and with almost 2/3 of the vote in, that's, you know, it's, again, not totally predictive, but it gives us some indication that turnout numbers are going to be up.
And that likely exceeds 2008's turnout and is very close to what the Secretary of State predicted at 290,000, which, again, would be the high water mark for a New Hampshire primary. And if you're a Democrat, you know what happened with turnout in 2016. You saw what happened in 2018, and you want to see those numbers and that excitement migrate to some place where you think that the dourness that has been felt over the past week inside of the Democratic Party dissipates because we can see there's boots on the ground.
Turnout means two things, I think, for Democratic observers. Number one, Democrats, I think, rightfully tend to extrapolate from the turnout numbers in the Democratic primary to some broader sense of Democratic enthusiasm towards some idea of what the Democrats will do in the general. It's also explicitly the theory of the case for Bernie Sanders' candidacy, that he says he's electable because he can drive turnout. And he's done that in some places and not in others, but that'll help his theory of the case to have a strong showing tonight, even though his lead seems to be shrinking, and to have it paired with larger turnout numbers overall.
And if you look at Steve will tell you that the state's 2 congressional districts, that first congressional district over in the East, Donald Trump actually won that congressional district by 1.5 points in 2016. The Democrat running for Congress in 2018 wins that district by almost 9%. Got big base votes, but is winning in suburban Manchester and more kind of swing counties, either holding his own or winning in some of those places. That's the recipe for what you're going to have to do in a state that Hillary Clinton won by just 2,700 votes.
Chris Matthews has been listening and watching all of this with us in our campaign headquarters in Manchester. Chris, what do you make of the conversation?
Well, Amy Klobuchar is the big sidebar story of this primary up here. It's going to be written about a lot in the major newspapers the next couple of days because she really jumped out of the back row into the front row in this last several days. She did it starting Friday night when Chris and I were together here pretty close to this geography. All of us agreeing pretty much she won the debate on Friday night. She did it because she had audacity. She jumped out on some hot questions where she praised Mitt Romney. She took on Bernie Sanders on the socialism label. She did a lot of things the other candidates weren't willing to do. And then on Saturday, I was with her, and she was getting good crowds. And I see this latest exit poll we've got up here. Fascinating stuff. The big question in this campaign is the Democratic Party is clearly divided between left and center-left. Clearly, we all know that. And the candidates fill those roles. Bernie fills the one in the progressive left, clearly. But who's going to be his challenger in the center? Who's going to be that person? Are we going to have to wait for Mike Bloomberg to show up with all his billions or not? Now, Klobuchar is winning in a number of those categories tonight in our exit polling. She is leading what I think is the most important category. Who can not just win the election, but unite the country? Amy Klobuchar beats out Buttigieg, beats out Biden dramatically. Who's the leader of those who consider themselves moderates or conservatives? There she is again, the winner. She narrowly is beaten out by Buttigieg on who can best beat Trump. I don't know whether that's a gender issue or not, but clearly she is shining in all these categories tonight. In a matter of days, Friday night to Tuesday morning, she did it. She showed with audacity you can jump out there and become a hero. And by the way, Democrats fall in love. And I think in her that tonight we all agree there's some joy there. Bernie indicts the weaknesses of American economic life, mainly the weaknesses in terms of our healthcare system, the evils he sees in the fossil fuel industry, and all those kinds of things. They're indictments. They're not happy. They're not joyous. She finds a way to care about the problem in a positive, empathetic way. And I think that empathy is something the Democrats need. Democratic Party, the Democratic Party, is made up of people who are generally charitable people. And I think that she has to, if she can do that, We'll see what she does in Nevada. If she gets out there and wins in Nevada, she's got something going.
Chris, I also wanted to ask Chris Hayes, who I know is with you there in Manchester, talk about Bernie Sanders on what appears to be a good night for him, vis-a-vis Chris's comment just now that Bernie indicts.
Well, I think you've seen the Sanders campaign aware that what works in a Democratic primary is a message of hope, and I think you've seen them pivot more towards that. In fact, the ads they've been cutting down the stretch have been about hope, right? It's sort of the idea of a better future, and I think they understand very well how much this sort of sense of there is something better on the horizon is a motivator. I think Chris is right for Democrats, right? And I think they have been aware of that. The one thing I would say about tonight, I think if you're the Sanders camp, you probably want it, well, you definitely want to win outright. You probably wanted to hit 30% as your benchmark. But on the other side of this, I think it's useful to think about three things that are necessary right now to compete in this field. One is you got to perform in the early states, right? We're watching what happens if you don't put up good numbers in the contests. It's like a shark. It's got to keep moving through water. You got to keep posting some sort of victories. It is hard to go for a long time without one, as Joe Biden says. So you got to be able to do that. You got to have the money and organization to play nationally, because you're going to have almost half the delegates awarded on Super Tuesday, 3 days after South Carolina. And you got to put together a multiracial coalition. Right now, Bernie Sanders is the only candidate in the race that is doing those three things. I mean, if you look at the polling in places like California and nationally, he's building a multiracial coalition. He's got one victory in Iowa, or a shared victory with Pete Buttigieg. He's got a good performance tonight, whether that comes down, and he's got a lot of money in an organization. There is no under candidate at this point, as I speak to you at 10-12. Who is checking all three of those boxes. There are some that are checking 2 of 3, but right now there's only one candidate in the race that's checking all 3. A lot can change. It is extremely fluid, and I think if you're the Sanders camp, you would like to see that margin much higher than it is. But right now, that is the sort of reality of the race on the ground.
To their frustration, what a lot of people are doing tonight is doing the math, combining the middle, and running that in their heads versus Bernie, however unfair that may be.
Well, yeah, let me just say one thing about that. I do think that the data we have on people's second choices don't align as neatly as one might assume in terms of ideological lanes. There's a fair amount of Biden voters who have Bernie Sanders as their number 2. There are a lot of Warren voters who are number 2 for all the different candidates, even if they're in supposedly different lanes. So it's not quite clear to me that the math is entirely straightforward about the combination or consolidation of the different candidates.
But that said, I think, Brian, it seems to me there has been a successful campaign by Bernie Sanders on the progressive left. He's won that battle, at least up in New Hampshire. He may continue to do so, but he's definitely delivered a knockout punch tonight against Elizabeth Warren. On the other side, Biden is not even in the running for moderate leader anymore, and that's a big development tonight. Yep. It is a battle on the moderate side between Buttigieg and Klobuchar. It just is, and I think we're going to see the problem they both have is money and organization around the rest of the country. Are they going to end up like Paul Tsongas did up here many years ago and couldn't go anywhere afterwards? And that's the problem they both face.
Our thanks to both Chris's for joining us from New Hampshire. As I said moments ago, speaking about today's huge story out of the Trump Justice Department, our next guest called this a day when career prosecutors showed more backbone than almost every Republican senator. We are speaking about Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who joins us live. Rachel.
Senator Warren, we are grateful for you taking the time to be with us tonight. And I want to start by asking...
Thanks for having me.
I want to start by asking about actually what Brian just brought up, your remarks tonight in your speech after the results started coming in New Hampshire about what's happening at the Department of Justice. What a lot of people are describing tonight, what we've been talking about tonight, is a crisis, potentially an emergency in terms of the rule of law. Yes. You were praising the bravery of those prosecutors who resigned. How serious is this as a crisis?
This really is serious. You know, Susan Collins said that Donald Trump had learned a lesson. Yeah, he sure has learned a lesson. He has learned that he can do anything he wants. And evidently, there are a whole group of Republicans who are willing to lock arms around him and protect him from impeachment and protect him from consequences and to do his every bidding. This is a country that increasingly, a White House that is increasingly all about Donald Trump, not about the Constitution, not about the rule of law. And that is a crisis for our country.
Senator, the results are still coming in tonight in New Hampshire. We've got about 2/3 of the vote in. It looks like you're running pretty steadily in 4th place behind Sanders, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, ahead of Vice President Biden. Obviously, that's got to be a bit of a disappointment from you, particularly because you're from Massachusetts, a neighboring state. What is the status of your campaign? How do you view your results tonight?
So it is a disappointment, of course. People worked hard, and I'm grateful for every volunteer, every person who pitched in, everyone who gave us $5. But I tell you, 98% of people still haven't been heard from. We still have 55 states and territories. And this is going to be a long primary process. For me, the central question is, what kind of primary process is it going to be? Is it going to be Democrats shooting at Democrats? Is this going to be a long and bitter and divided one? Or is this going to be a primary process in which we come together and we run on core democratic values, on core American values, and help pull our party together and help pull our country together? I think that's what this moment is all about.
Senator Warren, you're one of the Democratic candidates who's had to walk and chew gum with impeachment taking up a lot of your time in the final weeks. Is there something to be done in terms of working with Republicans and holding this Attorney General accountable? Do you think there's anyone left to work with for a bipartisan group of senators to get answers around these cases out of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office that affect Donald Trump's political allies, Roger Stone, Mike Flynn, and Paul Manafort?
You know, the Republicans in the Senate have shown that they just are spineless and that they just keep backing up and doing whatever it is this president wants. Now, look, each time another horror comes out of the White House, all of us get hopeful and think maybe this time, maybe this time, maybe this time the Republicans will step up and fight back. But I got to tell you, this is what the urgency of this election coming up in 2020 is about. Because we have a president who is out of control. And this election in 2020, we have to beat Donald Trump. That means we got to pull together as a party. We got to have a central message, and we got to have somebody who will take Donald Trump on. And that's why I'm in this fight.
Elizabeth, it's Claire, and I want to ask you, you know, it's at a certain point in time, I know you have every reason to go on and fight. You have a strong following, and clearly we have a bunch of contests in the next 30 days. But are you optimistic that after Super Tuesday that there will be some kind of coalescing so that we don't end up in one of those protracted, bitter battles that go all the way to the convention? How are you feeling about that right now? You think that is a possibility?
I don't know. I sure talked about that in my speech tonight because I am concerned. But you know, Claire, I tell you, there are so many people who are in this fight for all the right reasons. You know me, did the speech and then afterwards did a selfie line, and we were there for over an hour. And people are coming through and they're saying thank you, and they're giving hugs and talking about what's important to them. A young woman came up by herself and she said, I'm a broke college student with a lot of student loan debt. And she said, I checked and I have $6 in the bank. So I just gave $3 to keep you in this fight. That's what we got to do. We got to stay in this fight with people who are counting on us. This isn't about fighting other Democrats. This is about fighting for the America we believe in. That's why I'm here, and that's what I'm going to keep doing.
Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, we know you are right in the thick of it, and you are on to South Carolina, on to Nevada, on to those Super Tuesday states. Thanks for making time to talk to us tonight, Senator.
Thank you.
All right.
We are watching all of the various headquarters. We're going to fit a break in now so that we don't have to later, and we're waiting to see what the Buttigieg and Sanders headquarters do, what their threshold is, and whether it is keyed to networks calling this race. We have no idea when such a thing will happen yet, but I bet you Steve Kornacki can get us close after this. We are back. That's how the candidates stack up in a too early to call race with 70% in. That's our big board in Manchester. We got one here in New York, too, which happens to be manned by Steve Kornacki.
That is tight at the top.
Yeah, so here's what just happened. Buttigieg, remember, about an hour ago, it was 6,000 votes statewide. With an update we just got, Buttigieg has pulled within 4,000 now of Sanders, and it just changed again. About 38-32 separating them right now. 3,832 votes. So what has happened with still about 30% to come in is Buttigieg has taken 1/3 off of the lead that Sanders enjoyed at what seems to be his peak.
Wow.
What are we waiting on? Could this possibly change? It is an uphill fight for Buttigieg, but here's what we're waiting on, and I assume the campaigns are waiting on. A couple pieces of real estate here. Number one, see this blank right here? That is Hanover. Dartmouth College, probably going to have something like 5,000 votes that come out of there. Again, you hear college town, you normally think, ooh, that's Sanders country, maybe Warren. In 2016, Hanover was actually one of the worst cities, or one of the worst towns in the state for Sanders. Remember, he won everything. He only won it by 7. So there's an opportunity there for perhaps Buttigieg, and we've seen him performing much better in this Connecticut River area than we expected, quite frankly. There's an opportunity there for Buttigieg. I'm just seeing if that changed anything, the update we got. So let's see. Buttigieg would need a big number, a surprisingly big number out of Hanover. This right here is the city of Littleton, probably about probably about 1,200 votes going to come out of here. Again, it's blank. You'd expect, based on 2016, that Sanders would do very well here, but you're seeing some Buttigieg surprises along the Connecticut River. Can he get one in Littleton as well? And then what we've been talking about all night, they are starting to fill in. It's the reason the margin just came under 4,000 statewide, getting more and more along that Mass New Hampshire border. Windham, New Hampshire just came in just across the border, a little bit in, I should say. And you see Buttigieg, navy blue there. So he's got opportunities down here to cut into that as well. So really what he needs, a giant number out of Hanover. He needs a surprise in Littleton. He needs to get still a lot more out of southern New Hampshire, right along the border here. And he needs, in these rural areas that come in, he's really got to hold his own. One other thing that if you're the Sanders campaign you're thinking of, and it just occurred to me, Durham, University of New Hampshire, probably going to have about 4,500 votes come out of there. If you're Sanders right now and you're watching Buttigieg close this gap with the potential to do more, you are hoping, hey, get a big number out of Durham, the University of New Hampshire, and try to undo the potential gains here for Buttigieg. So those are the hot spots we're looking at right now. And again, the margin, 38-20, 3,820 votes now separating Pete Buttigieg from Bernie Sanders in the lead in this thing.
And Steve, can I ask you to scroll on that left-hand column a little bit? What's going on with Biden and Warren?
Yeah,
and
Warren sitting there at 9%. And again, we say Durham and Hanover, in theory, could be some Warren strength there that might help her advantage over the former vice president here. It's about 1,600 votes, 1,500 and change. Biden sitting there at 9%. Tom Steyer obviously spent a ton of money, 4%. Tulsi Gabbard, a lot of time in New Hampshire for her. She's at 3%. Yang, you mentioned him earlier, at 3%. You got some write-ins down there. We were wondering, would Michael Bloomberg get a significant write-in vote at all? 1% of the votes are write-ins. We don't know who they're for, so peak for Bloomberg would be 1%. If those were all for him, we have no idea if that's the case. And we just see, I'm going to ask my producer, the margin just shot up a little bit here. Do we know what that vote is from that just came in? Newmarket. Okay, so outside in the southeast part of the state, Sanders actually just got a little bit of an advantage there. So it's, again, back close to 4,000. We're waiting on some biggies. Hanover, Durham, Littleton, and those big towns right along the Mass New Hampshire line.
Steve Kornacki, thank you. It's interesting to see that we are not seeing Deval Patrick. We are not seeing Michael Bennet. We obviously Michael Bennet concluded or suspended his campaign tonight. Andrew Yang also suspended his campaign tonight. We're sort of waiting to hear about what candidates like Deval Patrick, Tulsi Gabbard, Tom Steyer may decide looking at these numbers. Obviously, Tom Steyer, looking down the calendar, has spent a ton of money in Nevada in particular and in South Carolina, trying to getting himself being rewarded with poll numbers, Steyer, in those two states. And so it's totally plausible to think that he may want to see what kind of return on investment he can get from those two states, despite the fact that he hasn't posted any points in New Hampshire and Iowa whatsoever.
And lo and behold, we've been joined by new house guests. People come and go so quickly around here. You know the guy on the right, Lawrence O'Donnell. You'll know the guy on the left a lot better in coming weeks and months. Joshua Johnson, formerly of NPR, is now ours and the newest minted MSNBC on-air host.
Great to have you.
Gentlemen, welcome to you both. And Joshua, you get to go first. Sum up everything you've seen tonight. Drill down on whatever you wish.
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but I can't sum up too much because I have been trying very hard not to extrapolate too much about this because we have seen results from two states that are damn near the same demographically. I mean, Iowa is white with a little seasoning. New Hampshire is whiter with a little less seasoning. And we're about to go into two states that are demographically very different. Nevada is 29% Hispanic. That's not seasoned, that's sazon. That's a very different state. South Carolina is 26.6% black. So it's almost like we have one data point in two different versions. Yep. And I'm waiting for these other two data points to have a better idea of where the electorate is going to go, especially after Amy Klobuchar's speech. You already said this, but she was the only person, I think, who spoke past her supporters to the nation to try to get more people on her side. She didn't say a word about her opponents, and I think she is beginning to elicit a kind of pathos with voters who haven't quite decided. I put a call out on social media to ask people, hey, if you're in New Hampshire, like, who did you vote for and why? And quite a few people have told me that they agree with a lot of her ideas. They believe that she can work across the aisle. One woman said that Amy was one of the few candidates whose policies are more focused on addressing issues that lead many women to feel that abortion is their only choice. Other candidates have made it perfectly clear that there's no room for people like me, a pro-life feminist, under the Democrats' tent. And all this was before Friday's debate. So I don't think we know enough yet to be able to say who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down. I see who's up and down now, but until Nevada, until South Carolina, it feels like, to me, just as a person of color, it feels like one data point in two iterations.
Do you worry, though, about the candidates that do better, at least in polling, with African-American voters and Latino voters, that too much damage has been done to them around the question of electability by having defeat? I'm talking about candidates like Biden. I guess I'm talking about Biden.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, black voters aren't stupid. We can afford Google like everybody else. And I think that in certain cases, like, I don't think that Biden's electability with African Americans is a lock. I think if there's one thing that voters of color have made clear to the Democratic Party, it's that we don't like being treated as a block or as a lock. It's the same reason why Michael Bloomberg has had to make that statement about the whole stop and frisk tape that was released, where he said, it was wrong then, it's wrong now, I regret it, here's what I've done since. I think that there is room among some black voters to be persuaded, especially in an election where the primary criterion is beating President Trump. It almost feels like a lot of Democratic voters, including the ones who responded to our exit poll tonight, are almost more concerned about Trump voters than about their fellow Democrats. And I think black Democrats are quite the same way. I obviously don't speak for other black Democrats or even for myself as a voter, but I think there's still enough time and enough room, especially among voters who are primarily scared of a second Trump term, to be persuaded, including because a lot of people in New Hampshire said to us on the ground and to me online that they waited right up until the very last second. I had one woman who said, I waited to mail my absentee ballot until Iowa was over. And then I read about Amy and voted for her. So she saw who succeeded in Iowa and went the other way. Everyone seems to be waiting until the last possible second to make their choice.
Among African-American voters, too, you see it in the polls. It's just, the raw numbers are interesting, the top-line results in terms of who's doing best, but those numbers have been changing dramatically. I mean, Joe Biden's African-American support in the last Quinnipiac poll dropped 22 points over 2 weeks.
And 15 points went to Biden.
And 15 points went to Bloomberg, right? And so, I mean, this is in flux. Persuasion is happening. Right. Both blocks of voters and individual voters are in motion within the Democratic primary, right. And it makes it important that we cover it. Right. It makes it exciting to cover. It makes it hard to predict, and it means that polling sets expectations that are getting thwarted, right. Because the electorate is moving. Even after they tell pollsters one thing, people decide something to do something different the next day.
Tonight was a good example of that.
Exactly.
Like the Quinnipiac poll and tonight's results, in many ways, they were night and day different.
And
they didn't look anything
and it's not because it's necessarily bad polling. It's because people are changing their minds and preferences are moving.
Right.
Lawrence O'Donnell, 70% some odd of the vote in. Is it amazing to you in any form that as of right now, 18,000 folks walked in and voted for Joe Biden in New Hampshire, given the population of the state, given the size of the Democratic electorate? He's at around 18,000 people.
Yeah, 9% of the vote, approximately. It is stunning that a vice president could perform like that in New Hampshire. There's a lot of other surprises tonight in New Hampshire. I want to go to Donald Trump's visit to New Hampshire the other day. That was thought of as he wants to disrupt the news cycle for the Democrats and their primary. He wants to win New Hampshire. He's thinking about those 2,700 votes that Robert Gibbs mentioned earlier, that Hillary Clinton beat him by only 2,700 in New Hampshire last time. So he went there to win New Hampshire. But I asked a Republican official in New Hampshire this morning, has Donald Trump ever said anything to any voter in New Hampshire who didn't already vote for him that could convince that voter to then change and vote for Donald Trump? He said, nope, he's never heard him say it. So here's a very important number tonight. Very important number. 8.7% of the vote, almost 9%, call it 9% of the vote, in the Republican primary is going to Bill Weld, is going to Donald Trump's challenger in the Republican primary. That, by the end of the night, is going to be more than 10,000 Republicans in New Hampshire today who got in their cars, got in their trucks, went out to vote to say no to Donald Trump. They took that effort. They knew it was hopeless. They went out and did that because they wanted to make that statement. They wanted to make, shall we call it, the Romney statement in New Hampshire, and using a former Massachusetts Republican governor like Mitt Romney to do that. That number, those 10,000 people, if they're not available to Donald Trump in November, then he has no chance of winning New Hampshire. And I'm always looking, and it's not easy to find, on primary nights, what does tonight tell me, if anything, about November in this state?
And if those are voters who will stay home on general election night, then they'll never be contested again. Right. If the Democrats can find a nominee who can excite and energize the base, who can turn out low propensity voters, and who can get those anti-Trump Republicans to actually go to the polls rather than stay home and be mad, well, then you've got the magic solution. Who on the Democratic field fits all of those criteria? Probably nobody. Some amalgamation of Democratic candidates could do it perfectly.
What if 1/3 of those voters stayed home? Just 1/3 of those Republican voters stayed home. Donald Trump cannot win New Hampshire.
To Steve Kornacki we go, who just gave me the eye like I've got new numbers over here.
We got some new numbers. We got some very important numbers. Let me call your attention to them right away. I said Littleton, one of the bigger places on the map we're waiting on. Buttigieg needed a surprise here, did not get it. Bernie Sanders wins this thing. You can see he expands his margin. Hanover just came in. Hanover just came in. Pete Buttigieg has won Hanover. He has won it by 297 plus 22, 319. He's won it by 219 votes. 319. He's won it by 319 votes. This is important. We said Buttigieg needed a monster number out of Hanover. This is Dartmouth College. Again, a lot of votes coming out of here. We're just trying to add these up in my head. He needed a monster number over Sanders here. He gets the win in Hanover, in a college town, in an Ivy League college town. Might have needed more out of there. If he didn't get a huge number out of Hanover, he didn't. Lost Littleton. And I can show you Plymouth State College. This just came in as well. Look at that. Bernie Sanders, a 307 vote plurality for Sanders here in Plymouth. So Sanders, with the strength in Littleton, the strength in Plymouth, has already offset the gain that Buttigieg made by winning Hanover, a big piece of outstanding real estate. We're still waiting on Durham. That's not Durham, that's Madbury. We're still waiting on Durham, where the University of New Hampshire is. This was a big Sanders town in 2017. I'm sorry, what just came in? Amherst just came in as well. Let's take a look. Okay, yeah, Amherst, this is a wealthy town. This is a bedroom community, sort of outside Nashua, 100% in here. Buttigieg wins. Sanders 589, so Buttigieg is able to make up about 416 votes here. But again, you see, he's able to make some gains here. He's able to make some gains in Hanover. You see, Sanders has been able to offset them. We also just got tiny town here in the far southwest corner of New Hampshire. Hinsdale's in. Look at that. Tiny town, but that's a 151 vote lead there for Sanders over Buttigieg. So Sanders, Derry just came in. Did we just get Darien? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, let's take a look at Derry. This is a biggie. Derry just came in. Bernie Sanders has won Derry. This is one of those big towns near the New Hampshire-Massachusetts line. We said Buttigieg needs to get big numbers here. Did well, but he lost this thing by 149 votes. Bernie Sanders wins Derry. That's very significant. Let's take a look. Nearly 80% in right now. The margin statewide, we had a flurry of activity there. Remember the last time you were talking to me, the Sanders lead had fallen under 4,000. It is now over 4,000. That's the advantage that Sanders has. So you had Hanover come in, you had Littleton come in, you had these other towns come in here, and Sanders has actually increased his lead. We're waiting on Durham. We're still waiting on some on the line here, but I think that is a pretty significant thing that just happened right there.
The Hanover numbers in particular are fantastic. Hanover's where Dartmouth is, Steve?
Yeah, Dartmouth College, yes.
Seeing those numbers, I mean, obviously seeing Buttigieg winning there, Sanders behind him, and Sanders basically tied with Klobuchar there. And Warren also in double digits. I mean, it's remarkable in these college towns, right? We think of college towns as this homogenous thing, right, where you can definitely predict what college students and college faculty are going to do. To have 4 different candidates in double digits in that one town in a place that Buttigieg is helping his margin is fascinating results.
You know, we saw something interesting in 2016. Again, we always show these numbers where Sanders does so well, 18 to 29. There did seem to be a difference between the Ivy League college towns, and Hanover, Dartmouth College is one, and the state university towns. So just take a look at this. You see Buttigieg won Hanover tonight. In 2016, again, Sanders only won it by 6 points. He won statewide by 22. So he underperformed in the Dartmouth College town relative to how he did statewide. Now take a look at Durham, the state university town, UNH. Go Wildcats. Take a look here. Take a look here. It was 71-29 Sanders in 2016, a 42-point win in the state university town, a 6-point win in the Ivy League town. And we saw that not just in New Hampshire. That was one of the patterns that emerged in 2016. And if you're the Sanders campaign and all that good news that just came out of that flurry of results, the fact that Durham is still outstanding and they're ahead by more than 4,000 votes statewide, that's got to be a very encouraging thing if you're at Sanders headquarters watching these come in.
They've got to be psyched to watch those come in. This is very exciting. Getting to this part where the margin is going to be, it's exciting.
If the control room can repeat to me, what did we learn about Pete Buttigieg headquarters? Do they believe they're close? And okay, so they're waiting for him to come out. It may well be that we'll hear from Mayor Pete prior to Sanders'
Although both of those rooms have been bumping for a while. We have had satellite images, a feed from both of those rooms for a long time now, and it keeps looking like they're about to hit it. It's obviously enough good results for both of those campaigns to sustain a lot of enthusiasm over a long night thus far.
So, Pete, we don't know how close this is to the introduction of the actual candidate. But it's like spirit leaders. That's your job at a headquarters.
Unbelievable 10 days for Pete Buttigieg, too. I mean, to have won Iowa, to be in a very, very close number 2 position behind Bernie Sanders, and to have sort of burst out of this, and I know he didn't have a strong debate performance Friday, but to have really burst onto the scene in a meaningful way.
Remember, as I keep saying, Sanders' margin was so sizable in 2016, we called it at 8 p.m. at poll closing.
Let's talk about how important that debate will be in Nevada next week. You have a lot of expectations now on Amy Klobuchar and her ability to debate, but now she's poked her head out of the foxhole. Will she get incoming like Mayor Pete did last week? And clearly he was under attack last week as somebody who was coming out of Iowa strong, and that's the way these things work. So Amy's never had anybody come after her, will they? And can they, in an effective way, diminish her surging out of New Hampshire? It will be a very interesting NBC debate next week.
And what happens between now and then in terms of what people start, things you need to know about Amy Klobuchar. You'll see that gear up in terms of her being a contender now.
The Oppo will start getting dumped.
Exactly.
The Oppo will start getting dumped on Amy, and she will have to deal with that. That's part of being being a good candidate. In the hunt.
Yeah.
When you're in the hunt,
Senator
stuff happens.
Kamala Harris. I mean, I think whenever, that's when they're tested, when they surge. Candidates aren't tested when they're in the middle or the bottom.
Right.
In fact, you know her. I mean, how do you think Amy Klobuchar is going to do when tested?
I think she'll do fine. I mean, she's a good debater. If you've actually been in the courtroom and had to think on your feet and you can't have a script, debating is easier because you're not script reliant. And I think that helps her in
How about when they come
debates.
after her, though, for her record?
Well, I think today she had some tough questions on another network and had a little bit of trouble, but they'll prep her. If one thing Amy will do, she will work very hard to prepare for this. She will take the time, and they will pepper her with the kind of attacks that she can expect. And so she'll be prepared, and she'll have probably some zingers.
And she's had some hard races. I mean, she's won everything she's ever contended in, but she's had some hard races. Her last Senate race was a gimme, but before that, she's had to fight for it. So she has, I mean, she's faced it.
Yeah.
Look at you, you're like, I'm from Missouri.
Yeah. You know, maybe, I don't know what her race was like when she ran for DA.
Yeah.
But I know in the Senate race, she was like 20 points ahead, and, you know, her first Senate race, because she and I got elected the same year. I know I got some of her money, because my race was very close, and hers was totally a walk.
Fair enough.
You know, like, yeah, so.
Let's run up north to the heart of New England, to Manchester, New Hampshire. Chris Matthews is joined by a friend of ours, Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post. Eugene, what are you making tonight thus far?
Well, first of all, it's still too early to call, I guess. But you know, Bernie Sanders has been leading all evening, and so, you know, an apparent or potential win is a potential win. So that would be the big story of the night. And the next story, frankly, to me, and a really big story, is that Pete Buttigieg seems to be within a couple of percentage points of Bernie Sanders in a state that Sanders won by 22 points the last time around. So I think that it seems to have been a really good day for Buttigieg, in addition to Klobuchar. Where this takes the race is totally unclear, as everyone has said. We will finally get to hear some diverse voices and some diverse opinions, starting in Nevada, going to South Carolina. It was just an awful night for Joe Biden, though, and I do think this is, you know, if this was not a fatal blow to his candidacy, it will do until the fatal blow comes. I mean, it was that bad, because I think I know a bit about African American voters in South Carolina, and I would, having been one of them, and I think they're very pragmatic. And I hark back to 2008 when you know, they were solidly for Hillary Clinton until she lost in Iowa, and it was demonstrated that Barack Obama could win, and then there was a very quick and very decisive switch. If I were the Biden campaign, I really would worry that this really weak single-digit showing in New Hampshire will cause a lot of voters in his firewall state to start looking elsewhere.
So, Eugene, you buy the kind of, you know, diminishes it to call it the conventional wisdom theory that nothing short of a win for him.
Well, in South Carolina?
Yeah.
I mean, he absolutely has to win South Carolina. I mean, Joe Biden has run for president 3 times now. This is the 3rd time. I searched my memory. I don't think he has actually won a primary ever. And at some point, you got to start winning some primaries if you're going to be a nominee and going to be president. You know, the other thing that strikes me is that these totals of the top 3 are really quite close, and they're all going to get delegates, and nobody's going to get the lion's share of the delegates. And because Democrats allocate the delegates proportionally, that just guarantees that this will be a long campaign, because it is just difficult to accumulate enough delegates to win the nomination when you've got this many fairly equally matched at this point candidates. So they could just kind of, you know, at least 4 or 5 of them could go on and on and on. And then you get to of course, we have Super Tuesday coming March 3rd. And really the other thing, the kind of elephant in this room, is Bloomberg's money. the carpet bombing of the nation with his television ads, you know, $350 million to date or whatever it is, and add a zero to it, it wouldn't matter. You know, potentially he comes in on Super Tuesday as a or the major player in this race. So I don't know when things have been as confused. And Nicole asked earlier, why aren't you Democrats happy? You know, because you've got all these good candidates. And I think people are just a bit anxious because we literally just don't know how this is going to play out.
Well, Eugene, you teed that up perfectly. I want to ask you about the other big headline of the night. I mean, what looks like a dramatic protest resignation en masse from the Justice Department over a dispute over sentencing guidelines, what seems like top-down instructions coming from the leadership of Maine DOJ. How does that affect what we're talking about, sort of the mood or the energy around this choice, this selection Democrats have to make?
You know, it should be front and center in the minds, frankly, of every American, but certainly of every never-Trumper, every Democrat, everybody who understands the danger this presidency poses to our idea of democracy. I think it was you know, Claire McCaskill, who earlier in the evening talked about the understanding we have that politics is separate from the justice system, that we don't mix the two in this sort of brazen and corrupt way that this president is mixing the two now. This is un-American. I was a foreign correspondent in South America. I saw this done.
Thank you, New Hampshire. Thank you so much.